Hi, welcome to our March 1st Friday. And today we'll be talking about developing skill sets for AI transition and beyond. I'm Cynthia Chang Correa. And for those of you who have been with us, here's just my bio. But for those of you who have been with us, you know my background. I'm not going to talk too much about where I'm coming from so that we can spend more time on the actual content. But of course, those of you on video, you can pause, but I'll just say that I'm coming at this from a multidisciplinary and cross-disciplinary approach with a background in information science and knowledge management and moving into competitive and decision intelligence. And much of my work today is actually in practical and competitive foresight work, which a lot of this is based on. I'm working with a lot of firms who are moving into AI and trying to understand it. And so I'm hoping to share with you through this series a number of different types of practices and just insights that we've gained along the way. For this particular session too, I'm also drawing on my background in instruction and training and learning and development. As some of you know, I've taught for a couple of decades in various settings, and so a lot of this is going to be grounded on that as well. So for today, I want to start by talking about the context, the landscape that we're in, because I think that's just critical context for us to start. And then we'll talk more generally about skill sets for AI, assessing skill sets, cultivating them, and then AI proofing and future proofing. And in general terms, our focus, as usual, is really on knowledge, research, insights, analytical practices. But many of these, in particular, this session, it can be transferable into other areas as well, because we really are talking about transitioning from traditional skill sets to AI skill sets, and we'll talk a bit more about that as we go. So, for context, and forgive me those of you who've been with us in past sessions and certainly from the start, because I think some of these slides have been burned into your retina, but we really can't talk about any of these topics without touching on these aspects. And quite frankly, constantly reminding ourselves about what we're working with. But today, I'd like to start, though, a little bit further back into 2018. And because normally we start with today's landscape. But in 2018, Firstmark, the company behind this particular landscape map, and they publish it, I believe, every March. So we're due for a 2024. But in 2018, they had published the analytics portion of the big data and AI landscape. And you can see here that I've just blown up for you the piece that is considered analytics and AI. And now let's fast forward to 2023. And basically, this landscape looks like this with all of its glorious granularity. And you can see that I've highlighted for you different forms of AI. And I've broken it down according to system level AI, application level AI, and point level AI. And I've talked about this in past sessions, so I won't break this down, but just to give you a sense of how things are moving, right, in terms of scale and scope in the span of 5 years. And then this exponential growth, though, it was, as we can see in media, in our workplaces, in our lives, it's touching and accelerating nearly every domain with all its attendant concerns. And it's important too that to understand that unlike other types of practices in AI, there is a first mover advantage in that time allows you to gather and create and leverage more data, which gives you more insights, and that is a competitive factor. So there are real advantages to this, which is one of the reasons why folks are scrambling to get into this early, in addition to, of course, the attendant hype. But we'll talk more about that in a bit. And then some of you have also seen this slide as well, where we're just focusing specifically on generative AI video timeline. And you would say, well, what does video matter? Most of us are, prompting using text, based tools, and perhaps even, looking for text-based outputs. And it's because a lot of this is moving towards video, and video also is an indicator for us because we can see here the leaps that we've taken just in 2023 from the first quarter to Q4, how large that scope is. And then even in the past couple of months, Google announced Lumiere, which is their video tool. OpenAI most recently, the Sora, Pika Labs even before that. So this is alphabetical order with their 1.0 that was released in December. So there are big leaps being made as we go, and that is actually going to change the way we practice and consume as well, and the way we learn and the way we build our skill sets. Chatbots, as we mentioned in February, I'm sorry, in the January session, one of the things I'm looking out for is how quickly chatbots will turn into video chatbots and not text-based chatbots, right? Because the engagement is going to be that much more profound and resonant with people, compute costs aside. And so, so we're really looking at these. So context matters. What we see on the horizon matters. Trends matter. And then I've also mentioned too biases and blind spots. And we've spoken in our last couple of sessions too about the Gartner hype cycle, as people talk about. And in this case, I've added these lines here, so you don't see this. This is actually my additions. These 3 lines at the top, because their generative AI tracks along this one track, and it's just this one little dot here. And of course, it's important to understand that generative AI isn't just one thing. It's really an ecosystem of various players and clusters of players and use cases. And so we're going to see different tracks according to this cycle, and as I apply it. And so the reality needs to be more granular and nuanced as we look at this. And as we look at this for skill sets development, not one size fits all. And so we have to recognize that there are varying peaks and troughs. There are a range of different perspectives as well that's attendant with this, in addition to the technologies behind this and the utility as well. And then there's also that inherent tension between the need for AI literacy versus the media headlines versus the thought leader debates that are occurring. Because oftentimes I'm encountering people who are very excited about AI, to the point of hype, and certainly the media headlines feed into that. On the other hand, I am encountering people who are on the other side of this, and they are downplaying this, and we'll talk more about this. So there's a concern, to me, that some of these people are missing opportunities as well. And then through all of this, there are always unknowns. So those of us who are in intelligence and insights work are always open and accounting for that. There's just a lot that we don't know, that we don't see, we can't know and see. So as we're trying to negotiate signals and reality versus the types of noise and biases and uncertainties that are there, it's just important to understand what we should be paying attention to, especially when we are looking at investing in skill sets for ourselves, for our teams. And so on the one hand, I like to see this along the spectrum, right? We've got the hypesters along one spectrum, and I actually incorporate Chicken Littles, the ones that who the sort of the doom and gloom folks, regarding AI effects in that category. Where they believe that AI is something probably more significant than it is, and at this point, right? And that the end is nigh, and then you've got folks who are pushing back against that, the anti-hype folks, the contrarians, and they're on the other end of the spectrum, and they're actually downplaying a lot of this. There's nothing, there's not, AI isn't really intelligence. There's no intelligence in AI. It's just a search tool. It's just a tool that follows instructions, et cetera, et cetera. And we've seen a lot of these arguments. And then others who are just saying, well, because of the hype, I'm actually going in the other direction. And I think that's dangerous too. And then there are the ostriches who are just tuning out because there's just too much going on. They either maybe don't get the technology, or that they just want to tune out because it's just overwhelming. And I think all of this is actually rather dangerous. I think we all need to be living in this realistic range, paying attention, to folks who are warning us about the risks and who are also excited, on the other hand, about where AI is headed and looking at the horizons, because they're helping us envision where things might be going. And for us to understand that in our reality, in terms of AI advancements, there are effects, and some of the effects are going to be related to skills, roles, jobs, as we're talking about today. And then there's also perceptions about AI, which is very much a part of reality too. How people perceive and react will come to bear on how others will react, and decisions that will be made. And so in our workplaces, for example, you may even see some of these dynamics play out, where you have the hypesters and the chicken littles and the contrarians and the ostriches. And then you're trying to negotiate where you should be in terms of understanding what your initiatives and activities may be and how you should be developing your skills. So this is important context for us to consider, because as I introduce some of these tools to you, it's important for us to realize where we should be and to have the realistic touchstones, because these touchstones are going to guide our decisions in terms of understanding which skills we're going to build. So that moves us into skill sets for AI transitions. And so for the skills involved in AI transitions, most of us are familiar with this slide already. This is just a summary of what we've been hearing and seeing over the course of the past year plus now. And where on the one hand, to the left, you see the disrupted skills. And so we see that there's a lot of talk about routine manual tasks, being set aside or supplanted by AI, simple customer service, simple content creation, coding for sure. And notice I didn't put programming because that's a higher order. So, but coding for sure I'm putting here. Basic data analysis and various forms of very administrative and clerical skills as well. You'll see that in lighter gray, I've put visual and multimedia production, because that is on the horizon, and a lot is being done in that area. But short form, it's further out than some of these other disrupted skills, and then transportation and delivery services as well, because there are greater barriers to that. But we can certainly foresee that these skills could be disrupted. And then on the other hand, we've got on the right side the valued skills. And so this is no news to you either. You've been hearing a lot of folks in industry and in education and so forth talking about complex problem solving, creative strategic thinking, various types of advanced technical skills for artificial intelligence and machine learning. And then for me, in particular, subject matter expertise with an AI layer. So it's a form of cross-skilling. And then you have cross-functional expertise, those who are, sort of experts in multiple subject matters, plus AI as well. Entrepreneurial and intrapreneurial thinking, emotional intelligence, and manual services. This is all well and good. It's helpful to understand what people are talking about and what they're seeing, but what does this actually mean for your knowledge and insights work? How does this translate to the actual decisions we should be making in terms of our skill set developments for ourselves, our teams, or organizations? And the other part that we have to ask too is along the time horizon, which is in 3 years or in 5 years. How will this look? They could change. So we have to understand that there's a lot more to just what is in the headlines and what sort of the general discussions people are having about the various skills that we should be focusing on. Most of it is really going to be very custom, and it's also going to be very important to our specific situations and time horizons. So now I'd like to focus a bit more on this cluster, the advanced technical skills and those that are also involving AI. And so for AI related skills, this is sort of the model that I use in terms of where to begin, where we start with the human and traditional skills that are in background, those that we already have, we've been cultivating pre-AI or pre-generative AI. And then we've got the general AI here, which is really more AI literacy. And then you'll see cluster around it and in this very sort of aggressive, complex Venn diagram, the specialized AI, where I've simplified this because there are other specialties, but we've got, AI management, technical and innovation aspects of AI, and quality assurance and risk management of AI, applied AI tools, and then planning and design. And each one of these have their own clusters of AI related skills. And so, but beyond these skills, we have to understand, well, how do we begin with all of this? How do we take what we saw, in the value skilled list, or the disruptive skills list, of the ones, inoculate ourselves against? How do we identify and assess specific skills we need to focus on? How do we plan to develop those skills and then execute that plan and reevaluate? Because iteration is going to be very important in this case. And so with this, it takes us to assessing these skills. And so those of you who are with us in February for Flat Friday, we talked about how important situational awareness is. And in this case, I've outlined that we need to be situationally aware of the AI landscape. We need to know where we are in terms of AI in relation to our organization, our team. And the last time we talked about practitioners, but we didn't talk about process, and I'm introducing the process piece today. And then for each one of these, looking at these various dimensions, the capabilities and maturity of the organization, team, and your own process. And that could be, say, your research and an analytical process, or what example we used and we will use today is also the competitive intelligence process, but any business, other types of business processes, market intelligence, business development, sales, and various others, and then looking at the competencies that are in place for each of these, and then specifically the skills that comprise or that are outgrowths of these competencies, and then determine from these where we're headed. And so we're going to get started, with the AI landscape. And forgive me, those of you who were with us and already have committed this to memory. But I thought that it's important for us to have a bit of a refresher of this process, because we're going to build on this. And then those of you who are brand new and weren't with us in February, you get to get the highlights version of this. But if you want more on this, or if you want more of a refresher, the February discussion, the session is in our archives on YouTube, and I'll send you a link to this at the end of this meeting. And so when we look at our landscape, we use the example of competitive intelligence as a process because it's an easily accessible one, I think, for a lot of folks, because it involves identifying needs, planning and directing a project, as well as the research components, analytical components, and then creating the products and communicating it, as well as the program management, as you see here on the left. And so if you come at this from the CI world, you come at this from another practice, say, marketing, sales, business development, or some other process, just substitute your process here instead of the intelligence function. But what we've done is we've overlaid this. We've laid out generative AI models, different types of developers, plugins, APIs, and specialized GPTs, commercial products, low code, no code products, and integrations, and various automations here. And it's broken down into various categories, as you can see. So generative AI models have commercial and open source, with large language models, small language models, large multimodal models, same with open source. And I won't go into this too granularly, but just to say that we basically have mapped out where the developments are for each of these general categories to understand where the landscape is in terms of the tools, because that's going to help drive the types of skills that we can foresee are needing. So as, say, for example, you've got in published source collection, this is where we're looking at open source intelligence and gathering, say, a lot of web-based third-party research. Generative AI models are really fairly robust in this now. Now, of course, it's not to say that there aren't any hallucinations and other issues, but a lot of folks are just using it. And so you can see that it's filled in here in darker green. And so this tells me here that this is maturing at a faster rate. than these others. And so that also helps me understand the types of skill sets that will be more automated, more rapidly, more thoroughly, and those that will not. And then what additional skill sets I need to develop to be able to just supersede the AI, because AI is going to free me up. But what else can I do to be able to enhance public source collection beyond what we've been able to do pre-generative AI? So laying this out helps us get a lay of that landscape in relation to a particular function or skill. So that goes well beyond the MAD model that we saw at the beginning of our session, because we're actually incorporating this into something, into a practice, right? So you can do this for workflows, you can do this for processes, and then ultimately even for systems, but that's more complex because that involves multiple workflows and processes. So we won't talk about that today. But we will focus more and develop the intelligence function and look at other ways that we can develop skill sets. And so in leaning into this, some of you who are with us in our fall sessions, September, October, saw that we had laid out the intelligence process for AI. And we had then, for each of the intelligence functions that you had just seen outlined in the table, but this is in the process form, we listed some of the developments, capabilities for generative AI. Now, if you'll notice, this is a March 2024 update. So I have updated this with the expanded capabilities that AI offers. But this helps us, again, get a sense of what the types of activities, and then by extension, skill sets that we need, skill sets in relation to what the tools require of us, say prompt engineering, say with published and open sources, if we want to apply generative AI, or if there are gaps in that as well. Say, for example, with published and open sources, it's covering a lot of OSINT research, fairly well. It's also covering multimedia and translations well beyond what a single most individuals can do. And so this also allows us to think about, well, what can't AI cover? And so that's something that we need to be asking ourselves along the way. And so here, I won't go into this in detail because I think it's pretty self-explanatory. But this is one way that we will approach. We can approach looking at skill sets in relation to specific functions and processes. And I also note too that in the middle here, there are a number of different AI agents, automations, integrations, and frameworks that are actually intended eventually to address multiple functions as well. So that's what the center circle means, that eventually there will be entire systems, right, that could address this, as opposed to just focusing on specific functions. And that's something we have to have an eye on when we're looking at understanding where skill sets are and will be, and what is going to be replaced, and what can be augmented, and how this relates to skills that we should cultivate. But as I mentioned, other processes come into play here as well. So if you are not an intelligence or insights practitioner and you don't use this model, substitute this with your own and conduct your inventory this way. By creating lists, and you could even be back of the napkin. So in terms of the landscape, that's one thing, is to be able to apply the landscape to different functions. But now we also have to understand where we are in terms of our organization's team processes and practitioners. And so some of you were with us when we looked at last month in terms of the AI maturity model. Again, I'm not going to lean into this and explain this too much, just to say that that this particular model is one we use for our clients to help assess the team and organizational maturity along different categories. And this gets very granular. This is just high level. But by understanding, the idea here is that by understanding the maturity levels of each of these different dimensions for your organization and or team, you can understand what needs to be developed to be able to achieve different levels of maturity. And so that also speaks to the different skill sets. And so if you are in an organization that is, say, at level 2, and they're moving fairly slowly, you have more runway to develop your skill sets. You don't have to worry so much. They're not necessarily as aggressive, at, say, automating. And so that's something to think about in terms of how you might think about, conceive the skill sets that you want to cultivate and the amount of time you and your team have. But if you are in an organization that's moving more rapidly, and you have every intention, the organization has every intention to move more rapidly towards level 3, then you have less runway to work with. So it's important to think about this particular frame, where your organization is, the pace at which it's moving, what its AI and digital transformation strategies are, and what its milestones, timelines are as well. And that will help you also understand the types of skill sets you should be moving towards and the pace. So it's very important, to have this context as well. And then within organizations too, thinking about this in terms of layers, where you have a number of different functions that are in play across the enterprise, each with their own workflows and processes, different cross functions that work with one another, because that's now we're getting into system level work, and different disciplines too will be innovating. And so as we're thinking about AI that is enterprise level, that is moving, away from just a functional level support to the cross-functional level support. And so it's important for you to pay attention, not beyond just what your own team is doing or what your own function is doing in terms of various types of AI and digital initiatives. What is happening at the enterprise level? And then what skills are required along the way? And then where things are at management. Many of you are actually managers and leaders too. And so how does this also change your particular practices and skill sets? And how automation is going to be affecting each one of these, all the way up and down the pyramid. But for some folks, it's not going to be automation as much as it might be augmentation, where your work, it's higher level work, but it's going to be augmented by AI, which is a different set of skills, different way of framing from simple automation that's going to be replacing specific tasks. And then there's specialization as well, where some people will be leaning more into deeper, into specialties. And because AI will simply free us up, from more mundane tasks to be able to go more deeply, or perhaps layering specializations going into cross functions. And so that's something else to be thinking about as well, as we go. And so, as we sort of take everything that we've covered so far in terms of background, in terms of context, we also want to apply this, as I mentioned already, to time horizons. So let's look a little bit more closely at that. So we've already seen this particular slide where we're looking at a particular process, and we've got the specific types of AI that's going to be that has been actually augmenting or replacing certain tasks within each of these. But we have to be thinking in terms of beyond the now. We have to be also thinking about what this might look like in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Now, I don't recommend going beyond 5 years, and even for some environments beyond 3 years, because we simply can't see that far. When we're doing foresight work, there's something called a cone of uncertainty. The further out you look, the more uncertainties there are, and the greater risk of, quite frankly, missing your mark. And so it's important, and there are tools for us to be able to manage that and refine that, and then that's for a different discussion. But for our purposes here, in looking at different skill sets, it's important for us at least to be thinking between 1 and 3 years and what that's going to look like. So for us to be thinking about where generative AI is today in particular, and other forms of AI as well, and its impact on the now, we're really missing out on the runway, the preparation that we have, if we're not paying attention to where this is headed. And this is where foresight work comes in, where looking at the different types of signals, where things are headed, in terms of different AI tracks, different types of technologies and clusters and capabilities. And we touched on that through various sessions at the end of last fall, and also for our 2023 year in review in 2024 look ahead in January, that session. So if you want to look at some of the trends that we're looking at, I'm basing a lot of what we're talking about today on that. I won't go into much of that, but we're working along these timeframes. And so as we use all of this, the various types of signals along these time horizons, we're asking, well, what tasks and skills are automatable? What aren't automatable? Which new skills are required? Because generative AI is requiring that we pick up new ones. And the most common one that people have been talking about and paying attention to is prompt engineering, for one. A year ago today, most people didn't know much about prompt engineering. And most of us have probably learned something about it, if not gotten pretty good at it. And so that's just one example of new skills. It's certainly on the user end. And then thinking about the new skills that are also not AI related, new skills that people will be leaning into, because AI won't be capable, at least for the foreseeable future, to be able to supplant those skills, right? Because that's one way of AI and future proofing ourselves. But also along the way, thinking along these three lines again: the automation, what is automatable, right, as these questions reflect. But also these questions can be applied to augmentation as well. Which ones of our skills can be augmented by AI, not necessarily completely automated or even partially. And then of course the specialization. And so when we apply process to skill sets along, say, a 2 to 3 year window, this is what we see for competitive intelligence, or at least I see. So the work that we've been doing for our own practice, as well as for our clients' practices, is, we're taking a function, and in this case it's the intelligence function, but whatever our client functions are that we're looking at, we're putting it along the left here. And we're putting that against looking at the various forms of AI innovations, the key innovations that are occurring, which automatable tasks and skills, these innovations, are related to these innovations, and then which ones are unautomatable, and then here, in the next column, the various types of new skills. So this looks very much like the outline, right, in the outline of questions in the previous slide. And so I won't go into this too granularly, but I just want to point out that, say, for example, with published source collection, because that's what we've been focusing on, and everybody understands research, right? Published research. So I want to lean into this, where we have multimedia open source intelligence monitoring. That's, so tools are beginning to help us monitor these, not just research these. Translation as well, multilingual translations, can occur. Also, various forms of summaries and analysis of the published source material itself. So these are areas of innovation that's occurring. And then, and by the way, this is not exhaustive. These are just highlights, right? Because the table can only carry so much. But which skills and tasks are actually now automatable? Well, certainly multilingual content collection. So it's not even just a matter of collection, but you can actually collect using using in multiple languages, summarization, synthesis, analysis. So what is unautomatable within this particular line? Well, complex and highly targeted searches. Those engines still, I'm sorry, those AI, generative AI still doesn't handle as well. You still need prompt engineering to be able to handle those layers. And so advanced prompt engineering is important, and also advanced multi-part analysis of the various types of the content as well. And because those of you who understand more complex research, you're not just running one research session. It's multi-layered, right? Depending on the different types of analysis that you're running, and that still isn't automatable. And then looking at the new skills, the ones that are AI related, and it's no accident here that this is cross-cutting. Now, I could have very easily have inputted this into each separate cell, But there's a reason why it crosscuts these cells, is because for the various types of new skills, the various forms of AI related skills really cuts across the intelligence functions, right? So it really becomes more process oriented. And because many of these tools ultimately will also be process oriented. And then for non-technical ones, things like, your, emotional quotient, right? EQ skills, cognitive and behavioral analysis, cross-disciplinary subject matter expertise. And then some of these are, combined, with, complex problem solving and so on and so forth. And you'll see that with reporting, I have here the asterisk because just for simplification, they're really, reporting will be automatable. And it doesn't mean that we're not applying quality assurance, which is right here. Okay. But we can, we can bet that most of it actually will be automated over time within the 2 to 3 year span, probably closer to 3 years. And I could be wrong on the timeline because or the pace, because as you know from our January session, I pretty much nailed most of the predictions from last year, with the exception of one thing, which is the rate of change. I actually underestimated that, as a lot of folks did, because this thing is moving pretty quickly. So with this, it's also important for us to think about other processes here, right? So this isn't just for the intelligence function. So whichever ones that matter to you, create a chart like this and fill it in as an exercise for a point of discussion as well. But we're going to take a look at this also, more closely. And so with situational awareness, we're going to lean now into competencies. And those of you who were with us last month, you'll also remember that we looked at just a very close snapshot of the competencies that we use, that we developed about 20 years ago for our own training purposes, and also for the SLACI certificates program and for my academic instruction as well. And so this is just focused on published sources here, looking at some of the key competencies categories. And then traditionally we've been developing the intelligence process competencies along each of these. And this again is just a summary. It's not too granular. So you'll know, those of you who were with us last month, that we added the AI competencies about a year ago. And I'm going to focus, more on this, because this is really where the skill sets come from. And so we're going to sort of bookmark that in our minds, and move over to the skills, where using these competencies, and now I'm just zeroing in, right, to what you looked at, but I just omitted the individual qualities. We have here the various types of, for sourcing, published source research. The different types of intelligence process competencies are here, working knowledge of sources and industry sources and macro environmental sources. But in AI, it looks very different. The AI competencies are looking at how generative AI tools operate. It's also looking at knowledge of tools used for intelligence research, and the ability to assess the applicability of the AI tools and so forth. I won't go into this too much, because we did discuss this last month, but to show that we can break these down into general categories of skill sets, right? Which is AI literacy in one sense, which is this here, then AI literacy plus CI, that subject matter layer combined with AI, and then cross-disciplinary plus AI. And then you can do the same here, not just for sourcing, but for research, right? So those of you who were with us last month, this should seem very familiar to you. And so, this takes us now into cultivating the skill sets, right? We've inventoried our skill sets, understanding what we need to do, but now we have to understand how we can build off of this. And so with a traditional skills inventory, typically it's focused on a particular employee, an individual, and you're inventorying their education, their professional certification, these various dimensions: technical skills, training, soft skills, work experience, and so on and so forth. You can also extend this by looking at the collective, right? The team skill sets as well. But this doesn't take us very far with AI. Sure, we can go through these and add AI dimensions to this, but it's not a very good set of tools to be able to help us understand which skill sets we need to evolve. And so it just really doesn't provide us a framework. So let's go back to this. Where we started at the beginning of our session is to talk about how AI, general AI, as well as specialized AI skills, can be overlaid onto the skills that we already have. Now, this is a bit this is a bit reduced, right? We're simplifying this, but this is to illustrate that here, this is where we can focus on AI literacy, and all of us really should have at least AI literacy skills, which is why this is green and blown up at this point. And then we have application-based skills. And this is where new AI tools are coming along, or perhaps your own organization, whether or not it's third party or something your own organization has contracted to develop. It's important that we also learn specific application-based skills. And some of these, though, can be AI literacy related, but also specialized applications as well. And so this is where, say, for example, it's an example of, say, using a chat GPT versus something bespoke, within your own organization. And then you've got upskilling, which is for any one of these individual circles, you can lean into this and you can develop into that specialty, right? And you can develop that out. And then you've got cross-skilling, which is where they overlap. And so this gives us options about where we focus our energies, but it's also how we can build up towards more sophisticated practices over time, right? So rather than thinking, gosh, where do I begin? I don't even know where to start on this. Well, let's start with AI literacy, right? Then you can start learning specific applications, which actually many of you already are. So I would say that most of us have already been doing this, but then focusing on upskilling in specific areas. Perhaps for some of you, it's managing AI tools as opposed to focusing on developing AI technical skills, or perhaps it's quality assurance and risk mitigation in terms of the work that you're already doing now. So this affords you, some frameworks to be able to focus, where you should be for given your organizational context, given your personal goals, given where the landscape is. And then cross-skilling comes later. As you start to master some of these, you can continue to build. So this is working clockwise. And so some of you were also with us too when we looked at the roadmap for growth last month, where we just generically speaking, right? Because for your own purposes, this should be more granular. But for year one, we developed a plan according to each of, for each quarter, in year 2 and year 3. And we start with AI literacy, and then we start to build on these skills. And so I didn't get granular here, but you can take this particular generic roadmap and overlay what your aims are based on the previous slide, right? To be able to say, well, these are my priorities. Is it, building off of AI literacy, which particular specialized skills do I want to build on? And you can create this map for 1 to 3 years. And so taking AI literacy towards upskilling, towards cross-skilling. And now with this, however, we still have the questions of which skills, right? Because what I just shared with you in the previous slide is just really focusing on how you begin. So this goes back to this particular table. And with this particular table, right, this is the area that we should be focusing on. What is unautomatable, so that we can lean into the specific types of skills, right, within each of these. Some of us perhaps are our research specialists, focusing on published sources. And so we would be leaning into this and using, this particular, set of diagnostics, if you will. So some folks are human source specialists conducting interviews, of people. And so these are some of the skills, and so on and so forth, analysis. And this is just high level. So for your purposes, you could get more granular, right, into even more specific skill sets, into the ones that are more specific to your own organization, into your own subject matter specialty as well. And so now you can see that we have combined a number of different approaches and tools to be able to marry into a plan for you, to be able to diagnose and understand where you should lean in. But there's also the good old SWOT toes analysis. And in this case, I'm not going to go into how to work this, because I'm assuming that most of us understand how to do the two-step SWOT toes. Now, if you're only familiar with the one step, you can either look up how to do the SWOT to identify potential strategies. That's what we're after, the original SWOT toes model, not what it's been reduced to. But here, what we're doing is we're taking, looking at our strengths compared to our opportunities, weaknesses to opportunities, strengths compared to threats, weaknesses to threats, to come up with specific strategies for each of these areas, and then which strategies aligns best with your own particular situation. So that is another way for us to be able to understand how we want to define our particular skills path, just a skills development, towards what we see in the environment and in the future. And now in that sense, though, traditionally we've also applied this to human and traditional skills, right? Many of us have actually done just this for our own career planning. But in AI, now we're looking at adding the AI dimension, and it's you versus AI along one dimension, but it's also you and AI for augmented AI. So in the middle, it's not just you anymore. It's looking at also the AI strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and how that compares. So this is obviously a multi-part, multi-layer analysis that you'll need to conduct. But as you do this, now you see that it's not just focused on human and traditional skill sets, but now it's this particular blended Venn model that we're using to identify where you want to focus. And so that's another way. And if you want to lean into this, in a future session and break this down and kind of do a step-by-step, I'm happy to do that. So just give me the feedback and I'll do that. But as we're looking at upskilling and cross-skilling inventories and then using this model, I've simplified it. But this is what it really looks like, right? Each one of these is distinct. And so it's important for us, as we're looking to pursue these, to not drink from this fire hose, right? Focus on the ones that matter to you and define a path for it. And so there could be, say, one path where you're looking at just upskilling towards subject matter expertise, and then you'll cross skill to AI. So you start with AI literacy, and then you choose say particular, subject matter area that you want to focus on in the human traditional, right? Then you layer on one of these or some of these AI skills, or you can also cross skill, to specialized AI from where you are now, to say, I'm just going to jump right into the AI piece. I'm not going to dive into leaning into deeper level expertise in the traditional areas. I'm actually just going to bring in and then you can expand from there. And then, of course, this is artificial, right? There's also a path C, which is really more blended. So I've also outlined in the last webinar the skills building, and I just want to flash this across, where we looked at AI literacy and some resources and applied AI skills as well. However, this isn't enough, because if we are looking at subject matter expertise and so forth, we need to expand beyond just those. Problem is, when we're looking at AI and its intersection with subject matter expertise, these are novel emerging practices. So for most of us, there really isn't a roadmap for this, right? We're talking about expanded and augmented skills that have no or emerging standards. And right now, no standards for the most part, lack of credentialing. So what we're relying on right now are really communities of practice, thought leaders, folks who are really at the leading edge to be able to help us understand what they're doing, what they're seeing, and various lessons learned. But that also requires too that you're going to have to exercise internal and external leadership, right? To pilot different types of products and services within your own organization, using some of these new tools, hybrid tools, organizing, some of these initiatives, forming new standards as well, defining them, and creating sort of these new practices or subspecialties, and then evolving along the way. So it's not a matter of there just being nice and tidy sets of tools and and certificates that you can get at this point. A lot of this really is just pioneering work. And what I'm drawing from too is the work we're doing with our own clients and also for our own practices. And so that's one of the things that's required from all of us as well. So we really need to be prepared to lead. So let's take a look at AI proofing and future proofing. And as I mentioned, we're really moving along, time horizons. It's not beyond 5 years, and probably more realistically between 1 and 3 to make it more manageable. But we've seen here, we've looked at, how, different ways that we can, use a process or, a workflow and identify some opportunities and skill sets from that. We've asked some key questions about what's automatable, not automatable, new skills, and of course, augmented. And then we also looked at, this particular, model and others as well along these time horizons. It's going to be particularly important for you, even if you assess what's happening now in the 1 year, to also stretch yourselves to try to identify what's happening along the 3-year time frame. Now, for some of you, you don't have a lot of experience doing that and looking ahead and using foresight tools. And so this is where this community, right, these webinars, this is what we're intending to do. And many of you who've been with us, we know that we're layering on. We started with, hey, how do we understand the landscape? And we're layering on now practical foresight. And so this is part of what we're doing here. So stick with us, because we'll continue to layer on this. And then there are also, other folks who are trying to understand the futures as well. And I pay attention to those who are in AI and technology and so forth, and then trying to translate that into what my clients can use, what I can use, and so forth. But we also need to understand too that as we go, and we're looking to AI and future proof, that it all starts with situational awareness, understanding where we are now, looking at the various time horizons, looking at what's automatable, right, versus the human skills. This is where we've been. This is the journey we've just been on. And then identifying novel practices. And all of this is iterative. It just keeps cycling through, and it's going to be impacting various types of functions, processes, skills along the way. So each one of us need to specialize, right, in our particular domains, in our particular skill sets. And here, I've just listed some things that we need to be focused on as well along the way, looking at various types of efficiencies versus risks and weighing those, because that type of focus and that the thinking that goes into that is developing new skill sets. Gap awareness, being aware of some of the gaps that the new tools are creating. Again, skill set, foresight, planning and preparation, right? We're applying deeper and more refined skill sets towards this. Conducting competency reviews. This is a new way of looking at things, right? So it's a new set of skills as well. The way we position ourselves to advise and shape changes within our own organizations, right? In this environment, that is also going to be something new for some of you. Integrations, and processing and system redesign, because as we bring in more AI, it's going to require sometimes some redesign of our workflows and processes, and maybe even, well, certainly entire systems over time. That requires new skill sets. And then anything new in terms of applying some new practices, hybrid AI augmented problem solving, right? New skill sets. And then local and micro innovations. Innovation isn't just happening in the broader environment. It's happening where we are right now, the way we adopt new tools. So be mindful of those new skills, inventory those, share those, and be able to articulate that to folks within your own organization, because that's redefining you and your own skill sets as well. And then, of course, adapting the pace of, the pace of everything as well. It's certainly moving. And then critical mindsets and perspectives. This is just a summary of a lot that we've been hearing about, but just some reminders as we move towards a longer time horizon, some of the things that we need as touchstones, and quite frankly, is foundational, right, to all the various new specific skill sets we want to develop. And the mindset piece is particularly important because it requires new frames of thinking. I will have a session on this, so I'm not going to dive too deeply into it, but I just want to flag this because we can't develop new skill sets without shifting some of our mindsets and perspectives. We can't work in an augmented environment or augment our own current skill sets, even in our current environments, without these. And so I want to just keep that in mind too, because that's also one way of AI and future proofing. And then we wrapped up last month with our due diligence, things to do. And so I just want to flash this as a reminder. I won't go into this again because some of you, been certainly with us for every month. And so I want to do some time, to some questions. But I just want this as another touchstone for us to not forget as we continue this, to think about what is here, what is near, what is next, and what will disappear. And that also bringing that thinking into how we craft our own roadmaps, our own paths for ourselves, our teams, and our organizations. So with that, I'm going to take questions and just flash some upcoming topics that are here as well. But please do share your questions that you might have. We could add this to the topics. Here are just some other resources for you as well as contact information if you have any questions. So I am going to stop share, and then we can get on to some questions. I see that. See, I'm looking at the chat here, and it says, I've noticed some internal departments are more advanced in AI adoption than others in the same organization. Would you need to create maps for each area? What's an easy way to integrate all that tracking? That is such a spot on question. So yeah, because what we're talking about here is focusing on specific workflows and processes. And each organizations have at least one, sometimes multiple ones that they want to focus on. And so I think what's important is it's really incumbent on folks to be able to conduct their own and bring this together. And this is actually another leadership opportunity for those of you who have learned some of these models. Now you can go back to your own organization and start engaging in that conversation and introduce these in the organization and say, hey, let's in various groups conduct these exercises and see what we get, and let's discuss this. And so I think it's particularly important that we that we are very focused on specific workflows and tasks, so that we don't so that we're not diluting, because so much of these skills are specific to what we do. And even if you think about, we've been using competitive intelligence as an example, even within competitive intelligence alone, there are different types of specialists with different skill sets. So they have to conduct their separate types of assessments as well, right? So even two people who conduct human source research, they might actually lean into different skill sets and different subject matter areas as well, and use different tools, right? Folks who maybe conduct Delphi, manage Delphi panels, and gather human intel that way, are just going to have different areas of focus, tools, and skills than those who conduct interviews, right? So that's an extreme example, but it's a very practical one. So that's one thing, is to, but I would caution you though, don't bite off more than you can chew. Initially, because this is a new practice for many of you, right? And it's quite frankly some new practice for us too, because we're working with our clients on this. And so what I'm sharing with you is what has worked, but we're still trying out some novel tools that the verdict is still out. And so as we do this, though, we're very careful not to try to take on too much. So if you are looking at trying to introduce this into your own organization, maybe start with your own practice first, right? Just even as a casual exercise, back of the napkin, for you and your team, before you even formalize it, just to kind of familiarize yourself with it, just to kind of have discussions around that, and pilot that. Right. So then if that works, you can say, hey, look, we've been doing this in our team. This is our outcome. These are our outcomes. I'd like to share what we've done. And maybe this, can also, be replicated through the organization for other workflows and processes. Right. So that's a way of working on that, is to just do this incrementally, learn as you go, and then you can incorporate those new learning into each iteration. I see there's another chat here. What are the best training programs for CI practitioners to upskill AI? There are many out there now. Yeah, they really are. So one of the things that the tools that I showed you today is the tools I showed you are also tools that you should be using to evaluate some of these programs. And also understand too that there are a lot of folks out there who are sharing practices that that I think fall short of even our best practices. I'm seeing folks, talk about using new AI tools, and as they discuss the application of AI tools, they're not even grounded on fundamental Intel practices. So they're focusing on the tool, and they're not even necessarily following the Intel process and functions and the best practices within that. And I'm really leery of that. And it's pretty apparent. So I would caution folks, to consider that. Are the people who are teaching this, are they grounded in fundamentals of AI, of CI practices? And this goes to any other practice. If you're in R&D, right? If you're in in sales, business development, other practices, procurement, are the folks who are talking about this, are they among the thought leaders in this? Are they well grounded in the fundamental practices, and then and they're actually testing these AI tools and being rigorous about it? Because not everything we've tested have worked out. I'm only sharing with you what we found to work, right? So that's the other thing to think about. So ask questions of them, look at their backgrounds, and look at how long they've been at this. Now, most of us have not been at this for 10 years because AI is new. But some of us have been paying attention to AI for the past 3 to 5 years before generative AI exploded. So those are the folks that you want to be looking at, because they're not the folks who just learned prompt engineering 6 months ago and then they're trying to teach you prompt engineering. And beware of folks who simplify this. This is not simple. And try to find folks who really do understand the AI developments and trends that are happening. And I don't mean trendy. I mean, they really do understand the various aspects of the AI landscape and the trajectories. If they don't, if they're just teaching task level stuff, okay, that's fine. But if they're trying to incorporate various, sort of augmented practices and various, deeper level changes, I'd ask more questions. Okay. So these are terrific questions. For those of you, another question is, for those of us who provide research and analysis projects, including OSINT human analysis reports, what would be the priority for the steps in understanding an effective use of AI? Yeah, so the tools that we just talked about can also be adopted and adapted to that. So breaking it down. But the key here is, and this probably goes back to the very, very first table that I showed you, where we looked at competitive intelligence against the various types of AI categories and the changes. I think that is really key. It's taking that particular table and getting more granular, right? Leaning into those specific cells that you care about. Say, for example, if you are into human intelligence, conducting interviews, say, take that particular functional category, that row, if you will, in that table, and then break down, because what I have is high level. Break down what you see there into more granular functions as well. And then outline it. And in fact, your question is actually inspiring me to maybe to think about creating a session on that. So that I'm not just describing it in the abstract, and I can actually lay this out more clearly in graphic form, and we can have discussions around that. But that is the first place I would start, is to take that tool and to get more granular with it along each of the functional areas of specialty, whether or not it's published research or human or analysis. And analysis needs to be broken down into multiple types of analysis, right? That's just an uber category, within these categories. So that's how I would approach it. And I see that we are a few minutes out, so I know some of you have to go, but I appreciate your sticking with me.